the will of the individual, of the soul, here we're talking about, controls a lot of things, far more things than most people on earth are aware of. And your mind and its will is very, very different from your soul and its will. So a lot of people think, oh, they'll be able to control it with their mind somehow, but actually it's your soul's passions, desires, longings, intentions, and will that defines when you die to a large degree. Of course, there is also the genetic degradation that also participates in your death. So there's an amalgamation of the genetic problems that you've inherited along with the genetic situations you've inherited from your history, from your predecessors, as well as the sin you have imbibed over the course of your own life and what that will attract, as well as mixed with your intentions in your soul level, whether you want to die or not, whether you want to stay around or you want to die. These all have an impact upon the timing of your death and the manner in which you die. Whether you die from an accident or a sickness so it's all determined to a large degree by your own soul's feelings.
Because it also impacts on how much your guardian can even intervene in certain situations.
Correct.
And how much guidance you can have in certain situations. If your will is not to remain in your physical body, then there's laws governing them intervening in those situations.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, because frequently if you really wanted to live, they could intervene. Right? If your emotion is that you really wanted to live, they could intervene. And I remember in John's death, I had a chat with our spirit friends and John himself during his death. And he took about 3 days to die, John, the Apostle John, in this life. He was stabbed. So he lost the operation of his bowel when he was stabbed, and a lot of his internal, he was stabbed in the lower abdomen. And was very, very ill, as you can imagine, in the hospital. But he still could have lived, but he chose to leave. It was very hard for him at the time to choose to stay, because he looked at his own body, which he's always had a very strong connection to, and its health. He's always been a very healthy man. And to see it in such a poor condition, and then to also feel the emotions, the fundamental thing that right away near the end was he felt the emotions of his family towards him. Within a couple of days, his family had taken over his house. They'd started cleaning out his belongings, even though he was in hospital and still alive. But in his sleep state, in his state, you can visit these locations and see what's going on. He felt the intensity of the lack of love towards himself. He also felt a feeling of hopelessness about his ever meeting his soulmate. And fundamentally, those two things made him choose to pass. Make sense? Yeah, pretty sad emotions, as you can imagine. After he passed, of course, he had to go through those emotions. So he had a very sad time after he passed because of that.
So, what you are saying, I guess, is that it's more loving to stay and fulfill your life here on earth than to choose to die.
Yes, but I'm also saying this with qualification. It's more loving to stay if you want to stay. It's a more loving choice than to want to go, obviously. Wanting to go means you're wanting to avoid something of some kind, isn't it? But there is a time when it's wise for you to go, fundamentally. So if you're very, very ill and very, very sick and just hanging on to life, well, there's not a lot of point to that because you're not actually living a life. So under those circumstances, it would be wise to just let go, right? A lot of people on earth could choose to let go rather than kill themselves. They could just choose to let go of their attraction to stay, and they would naturally pass, which is not the same as a suicide, does it? Make sense? Suicide is the intention to pass, not just letting go and letting what happens. Do you know what I mean? There's a big difference between those two phases. So, you know, the average person on earth either has an intense fear of death and they want to stay at any cost, or they get so tired and exhausted with staying that they just want to go pretty much at any cost. Now, none of those decisions are loving. You know? The loving decision would be just to appraise the situation, appraise whether you're living a life or not, and then realising, well, if I was in the spirit world, I could be living a life that I'm not living here, and not for emotional reasons, but physically, you might be so disabled physically that you're unable to live a life. But so you might be on life support or something, and unlikely to ever get off of it. What's the point? You're not living a life. And the wise thing to do there would just be to let go and not try to stay alive. That makes sense? Yeah. Of course, many people don't think that way, you know, because they feel that life on earth is the only life, and so naturally they are so concerned and worried, so they fundamentally feel that I've got to stay here as long as possible, even if I'm very sick. And I was talking to my mother, she has cancer in a number of places in her body. She's very, very ill. She can hardly walk. She hardly stand up at times, hardly function, doesn't enjoy anything anymore. And I said to her, why don't you just let it go? You know, why don't you just let it go? She said, oh, I've got to stay for my family. I've got to stay here. I've got to stay here. I've got to see what happens to them. And I said that you can see what happens to them when you're in the spirit world. I don't know that. I don't believe that. I'm only going to see what happens to them when I'm here. You know, so I've got to stay and grit it out. You know, and that's what she's doing. She's been very, very ill now for 4 or 5 years and sticking around.
I have had the opposite longing all my life almost. I worded that I was longing to come to God.
Yeah.
That really was, I wanted to die.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be caused by many emotions you're avoiding as well, from your childhood in particular. And that would be then considered to be a suicide. Does that make sense, Lena? So it's a good thing you didn't.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
In my work, I meet people who are doing voluntary assisted dying because they are definitely going to pass from their illness.
Yeah.
Is it, in terms of whether things are classed as a suicide or not, is it about their intention and motivation?
Well, now there's a whole lot of can of worms there, right? Literally. You see, most of the people who are in that state are on drugs. And most of the people who are on drugs have spirits trying to keep them alive so they can share in those drugs. Does that make sense to you, Brittany? Yeah. So now there's a lot of other things going on. You've got spirits trying to keep your body alive. You've got you wanting to die. But you've got you not wanting to feel any pain. Right? And so there's now a lot of quite sinful things that are happening on many levels with many people surrounding you. Now you're in a very murky world of sin and darkness, you know. And under those circumstances, you can't really say definitively what the best course of action is, because, you know, there are so many wrong things going on all at the same time, based upon the will of the individual trying to avoid pain. So, man, many of you saw Lena die, right? And she died from cancer. You saw the terrible condition her body was in near the end of her passing, right? She was desperate to stay alive, but also there were spirits around her who were desperate to feed off the morphine, because morphine is a drug that spirits definitely have a big effect on spirits. So opium-based drugs have a big effect on spirit attraction. And so heroin, morphine, much the same thing, right? And so you end up with a lot of spirit attachments trying to keep you alive while your body is actually ready to pass and ready to functionally die. And so you end up with this extension of life that occurs to the, you know, and the avoidance of pain at the same time. And if you chose to not avoid the pain, you would either die or get better. You know what I mean? Once the body decays too much, you only can die when you accept the pain. And when you choose to not accept the pain, now there's a whole heap of other attractions that happen, which are very, very bad for you. And are all related to spirits wanting to feed on the drugs that you're taking, and the spirit atmosphere around you becomes very, very dark when that happens. It's very bad. So when I see those kind of things happen, it's sad because it all happens from the avoidance of emotions at the beginning anyway, the illness, but the avoidance of the physical pain also it just exacerbates the problem further. And then the attractions to drugs, and therefore what they then attract, just incredibly intensifies the experience to be such a devastating experience that by the time a person has passed, so by the time Lena had passed, the spiritual atmosphere surrounding them is so bad that it's very, very hard for them to get out of that atmosphere for years afterwards. Not good. Yeah, and so the question you ask, obviously you're involved in the death process, don't you, or the after-death process?
Sometimes I meet them before they do it.
Yeah.
They're pre-arranging.
They're pre-arranging their own death, yeah.
Yes, and then I talk to them again after they've done it. So this is helpful in some ways for me, for when I'm talking to them.
Yeah, even their mindset before they do it is very much governed by spirits and also very much governed by the emotions they are trying to prevent. And a lot of that is governed by the emotions they prevented, which caused the disease in the first place. Of course, there are some conditions which mean that you're conscious while your body is wrecked.
Yes.
Up there. And they are very disturbing conditions, really. But again, driven by the will of the soul, which is interesting. So, some of those diseases, all disease, we need to talk about disease at some point, but all disease is functionally driven by your own soul and its desires and passions in disharmony with love. And there's certain types of passions and desires you have, including the desire to punish the people around you, that can cause the disease. So an example is, let's say I'm not loved by my husband, and the only time I'm loved actually by anybody is when I'm sick. So in other words, the only time I get a cup of tea in bed is when I'm sick. The only time I have a meal prepared for me is when I'm sick. So what am I learning here? That I'm only loved when I'm sick. Now, if I want to manipulate people into so-called loving me, what's my next step?
Be sick.
Be sick. Right? So instead of dealing with the fact and grieving that I'm not loved, I'm trying to manipulate people into loving me, which is a very dark emotion, actually. To manipulate somebody into anything is a very dark thing to do. So now my darkness becomes very present with me. I'm manipulating people by wanting to be sick, right? And I'm doing it so that I can avoid the fact that I don't feel loved. That's going to drive some very dark behaviour on my part towards myself and towards other people. Makes sense, Brittany? Yeah. In the process of driving that behaviour, of course, I may end up dying, or I may get a sickness that lingers for many, many years, forcing people to look after me. So I knew one lady, she realised that her husband was cheating on her. She was really, really angry about it, and she instantly got you could call it it's not a sickness really, because it's a state where she became, what's the word, babe?
It was like a degenerative disease.
It was a degenerative disease.
It was ALS.
ALS. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lou Gehrig's.
Yeah. So she was like living inside of a body that wouldn't function. That it was a purposeful choice on her part to create a body that wouldn't function but still live. And she was doing it to punish her partner who had cheated on her. And she didn't want to go through the emotions of the fact that he didn't love her and cheated on her. And the reality is that he looked after her for the rest of her life in that state. even though the whole time he was still cheating on her. Pretty sad, eh? She got the degenerative disease only a few months after he cheated on her. And we had a conversation about it, and she's a lady who lived in Sweden. We had a conversation about it, and she knew.
She knew that she was intentionally doing it?
She knew that her disease started soon after he cheated on her. Yep. And she knew the feeling she had, the intention she had to punish him.
Hadn't linked it to the illness at that point, had she?
She hadn't linked it to the illness, but she knew. She knew the intention she felt. Yep. Once we talked, she linked it to the illness, but she still had the same intention. So it would never be cured. The irony of it, I found, was that she could easily have been cured if she was willing to grieve, the cheating, and also do something about it, but she was not willing to do so.
So it comes back to the same thing, really, in the end. It's about people not wanting to grieve or feel certain emotions, and
Yep.
I can talk to them about that.
Yep. There's another lady, some of you might have known in Australia, I won't mention her name, but her husband cheated on her. Within 3 months she was dead from a brain tumour. She wanted to die, and she used her mind to do it. She didn't want to address it, the lack of love on his part, or the lack of love she felt, or didn't want to feel any of those emotions.
Important to feel.
Yeah. Yep. Cures all disease.
Thank you.
Let's come down front. Yeah. Casey.
So in palliative care, when we have our family members who do that and we assist in doing it,
Yeah. In terms of assist in helping them die, you mean?
and yes, because we have to give the drugs.
Yeah. It's a very grey area from a moral perspective, because functionally the person has got the illness because they wanted to die or manipulate the people around them. And myself, I would refuse to do it. The main reason why I would refuse is because I'm being manipulated into doing it, something that is against my desire to do. The person could choose to leave using an intentional method of their own, and yet is sticking around. And they also wish to take the drugs in order to avoid the feelings anyway. And that is keeping them alive, unfortunately. So if they chose to get rid of the drugs, the pain would be so intense they'd die very, very quickly, right? But the average person not willing to feel the physical pain or the emotional pain. So there is a thing in modern medicine that says you've got to avoid all pain, and you do that at all costs. And even if the cost is your spiritual cost, it doesn't matter, you do it. I don't agree with that sentiment at all. There's many times when I've been in extreme pain and not taken any drugs because I know the results. I've even been offered drugs and not taken them for the same reason. Yep. So in terms of somebody involving me in that, well, that's up to you. Obviously, it's your choice or decision to break those laws or not. That's your call. So I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying there's a lot of dangers, in spiritual dangers, in decisions associated with such things. Yep. By the way, the spiritual dangers have already been engaged by the family or the person who's in that condition. They're in the condition they're in because they refuse to feel emotions in the first place. Now, of course, there's other circumstances like, let's say, a bad car accident. Well, the definite intention of doctors is to keep a person alive no matter what the cost. Now, the reality is our body has limitations. You do something to the body and you don't give it the sort of what I would classify as a reasonable care, and you do something to the body, give it reasonable care, it will recover, right? if the extent of the circumstances are such that the body would never recover given any reasonable circumstances, then you've got to consider why you're even giving the body any more life under those circumstances. Because the way God had designed it under those circumstances is for it to die. So whenever I'm trying to do something against what the law is saying for me to do, right, that governs my life, I am fundamentally working or attempting to work against the way the Lord would naturally operate. And this is a very strong grey area in human legality systems, isn't it? It's a big grey area, and me even saying such a thing would be believed to be a bad teaching, right? But the reality is, if you look at it, your body has been designed with limits. When it exceeds those limits, it's been designed to naturally pass, and to do it very quickly, actually, to quickly pass. That's how it's been designed. And that's to your own advantage, because the quicker you pass, when your body no longer can support its own life, the quicker you pass, the faster you'll be in the spirit world able to live a life. That makes sense? So why not let it do its thing rather than keep it alive if that's, if that's the underlying intention, is just to keep it alive no matter what's happened to it? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. I certainly would not do such a thing. I wouldn't keep my own body alive. If it was all mangled up, and everything else, I'd just let it do what it was naturally designed to do. Just let it pass. So under some circumstances with the euthanasia question, you are basically just letting the person pass given the body's natural limits. Under those circumstances, well, that's fine. But if you're assisting it to pass, because the natural circumstances are not working, then the natural circumstances are not working for a reason, and you've got to find the reason. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
So it is a complicated question in terms of what is the reason, how do I find the reason, what's the reason why the person's staying alive even though their body is, dying. And why do doctors want to pump bodies full of drugs while the person's dying? And they know they're dying.
So in my situation with my mother and my grandma, and I had to push the drugs, then does that make me responsible for murder, basically?
Well, if she requested you do such a thing, obviously not fully responsible.
One did, one didn't.
Right. Well, if you just turned off life support, well, that would be a thing that would naturally happen anyway. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's different than administering drugs to kill the person.
I had to administer.
Yeah. So that's something to feel about.
But then when my sister died a couple of years ago, because of my transition, I refused.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want any part of that anymore.
Yeah, well, you would have felt some of the hurt from the prior thing.
Yes.
In your soul, and therefore not wanted to do it again, which is a natural thing. It's like if a woman has one abortion, she probably, it's very hard for her to have a second one, unless she's very detuned from the results of the first one. When you do something that's wrong, you feel sensitive to it, you don't want to do that thing again, which is a natural learning process, right? So but the questions about assisting dying and so forth, there's complicated stuff into it that I probably, that deserves a whole day's discussion on its own. You know what I mean? Not something I want to sort of talk about in this discussion. Because fundamentally what I want to mention in this discussion is how everything works. But you can see in finding out how a thing works, there's a whole heap of other questions that arrive, doesn't it? That's the natural course of events, isn't it? There's a whole series of questions that come about when you know how something actually works. Then there's a whole series of questions about, what do I do in this situation? What do I do in that situation? How the thing works can enlighten and help you make wise decisions and choices. Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So, a person might have had IVF in the past, for example. Once they understand the true ramifications of an IVF program, if they still chose to do it, it would mean they'd be murdering all those children. Before it might have happened with less intention, but afterwards, once they know, then it's happening with more intention. And the law definitely works upon intention. So, obviously, we're all in a learning process, and I'm not saying there isn't any penalty from doing something that you weren't aware of, because there is. But the penalty is less than doing it when you're fully aware.
I feel there was. My depression got worse and worse.
Certainly,
and worse. Yes.
certainly, and all related.
Yes.
Sydney, all related. So yes, a lot of the reason when we do a thing, a lot of the ramifications are being felt. It's just how conscious we are of those feelings. Yes?
Thank you.
Mm.